I sat at home alone and felt sorry for myself, ill-tolerated by the forced idleness. It was time for a change of tactics, from trying to get my job back to rebuilding my reputation. You see, until 6 weeks ago, I was a project manager. I once described my job to my wife as juggling 500 balls at once and organizing to make sure they all hit the ground at the same time. After 20 years, I finally got around to some big projects and big money. After paying for the kids' college tuition and my wife's extravagant lifestyle, money would come in handy if I didn't want to die of old age on the job. We didn't have much in the bank, and without new income, the situation was getting grim. Yeah, I felt sorry for myself. The last project had failed miserably when the main contracting company went belly up. I handed a friend still working for the company the minutes of a board meeting where I convinced them not to contract with the lowest bidder, but they wouldn't listen. Given the choice between me and them, the board must have pressured the secretary writing the minutes to remove the redundancy. I was home alone, as Sandra, my wife for 20 years, had gone to her sister's house for the 5th Friday in a row. She asked if I wanted to go with her, but I declined, as usual. Why should I help her sister plan the 15th anniversary of her marriage? Her sister herself was fine, but her husband, that arrogant jerk, I couldn't stand. He owned a small but successful manufacturing company he'd founded with his wife's inheritance. Hell, if he told me one more time that it was now worth $12 million, I'd strangle the little toad. My voluntary recluse was interrupted at 10 minutes past 10 in the evening by the doorbell. After 3 bourbons opening the door, I was slightly inebriated. There stood my wife as she looked 10 years ago. I smiled as I realized it was Linda, Sandra's younger sister. It was now becoming obvious. Slightly shorter in stature, quite pretty, and with considerably larger breasts. I invited her in and offered her coffee or tea. We made small talk for a while. "What's new, Linda? I thought Sandra was at your place with Neil, planning your anniversary." I didn't miss Linda's slight confusion. "Our anniversary was 4 weeks ago, Dave. Now it was my turn to be bewildered. Bourbon has many fine qualities, but increasing mental acuity is not one of them. Rather than make a complete idiot of myself, I remained silent. Linda clearly had something on her mind. "Look, I know you wouldn't want Neil and I to say anything, and I realize you're a little embarrassed, but still, I wanted to thank you personally for your and Sandra's gift. It is the most generous, thoughtful gift I can imagine, and we are very grateful." If I had categorized my previous thoughts as slightly stunned, I was now simply baffled. "What are you talking about, Linda?" "Well, if you want to play the denial game, I can play along. I don't know exactly what Sandra told you." "Gosh, this is a little embarrassing." She paused to calm down, obviously unprepared for my earlier reaction. "As I'm sure Sandra has told you, I'm frigid. I've never enjoyed sex. Sure, once a week, if necessary, I perform my conjugal duty to Neil, but I hate it. Accordingly, Neil started saying that all the romance was gone from our marriage, and he must be right. We hadn't been together in ages. Not only that, we couldn't conceive. Frankly, we're lucky we lasted as long as we did. That's why your and Sandra's gift means so much to Neil and me. I just wanted to thank you in person. I envy you, Dave. You must have a very strong marriage if you trust Linda that much." I don't know if she noticed my dumbfounded expression, but if she did, it didn't stop her from kissing me lightly on the lips. "Thanks, Dave. You're a diamond." "What the hell is going on, Linda? Where's Sandra?" "She's on a date with Neil, silly." My sudden look of anger must have finally reached my smiling sister-in-law. "I repeat, Linda, what the fuck is going on here?" "Well, Linda said it was your idea, your and her anniversary gift to us. 10 dates with Neil for 10 weeks. Neil gets 10 weeks of romance, and I get 10 weeks of not getting hit on. Sandra said you agreed that it would revitalize your fading sex life. Knowing she was on a date with another man would awaken your competitive instinct. From what she told me, you've done pretty well with her over the past 4 weeks, you know, in the bedroom." She stopped. I don't know what expression was on my face, but it was enough for Linda to realize that something was obviously wrong. Finally, my wits returned to me, and I hissed, "Sandra and I haven't made love in over 6 weeks. You mean she's on a date right now? Shit, so as we're talking here, they could be booking a motel already." "No, silly. I always insist they come back to our house for sex." "What? You mean they've already done that?" "Yeah, they had sex after the first date." "Come on, Dave, you knew that was the deal, didn't you? Please tell me you knew. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this picture, I went to the nearest wall and punched through the drywall with my fist. Linda was stunned, but came to her senses as I rubbed my arm. Damn it, Dave, I can't believe Sandra is cheating with Neil, and I love it. You really had no idea, did you? Her eyes suddenly hardened. We have to stop her. I was way ahead of her, hitting the speed dial button on my phone. Sandra answered on the 6th ringtone, out of breath. You cheating bitch. Come home immediately so we can work this out. Linda told me all about what you've been up to. I can't, Dave. I'm in the middle of something right now. Yeah, you're in the middle of the end of our marriage. Ever since the kids left home, you've been nagging me to let you have an affair on the side. Well, the answer was no then, and it's still a hell of a no now. Just because you found some candy-coated way to justify them to yourself doesn't make them right. No, Dave. Look, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I gave Neil and Linda my word, and you always said I should keep it. In 5 weeks, it'll all be over and we can get back to normal. If that's a problem, then maybe I can ask them to release me from my word, but it'll be up to them. I can't bloody believe it. Go home right now. No, Dave. A word is a word. Anyway, you don't own me and I can do whatever I want. That's the end of the call. Quick, Linda, we gotta get to your place. I gotta stop this shit. You drive. I'm over the alcohol limit. By the time we got there, the house was empty. There were signs of a hasty departure everywhere. Linda looked almost as sad as I did. I have an idea. I'll call Neil and tell him what she's up to. There's no way he'll go any further if he knows you don't approve. Both of their phones spent the next few hours sending calls straight to voicemail. Around 2 in the morning, I drove home. Linda was as devastated as I was by her complicity in cheating on me. I took her at her word to tell her husband that he did not have my blessing to have my wife, and to let him know that her alleged blessing was being withdrawn as well. The deal is off. By Sunday afternoon, neither Linda nor I had heard from our spouses. Likewise, they were not answering their cell phones. That gave me plenty of time to think. Hell, what else was I supposed to do if sleep was out of the question? Where had our marriage gone off the rails? As far as I knew, we had a normal, healthy union. Nothing indicated that it was headed for that derailment. By Sunday afternoon, I realized that by waiting at home like a petitioner, I was making myself feel helpless. I packed a couple bags and moved to a motel. I didn't hear from anyone until Monday afternoon when Linda called. Dave, Neil came back last night. I asked him where he had been, and he said that after you called Sandra on Friday night, they moved into a motel. Dave, Neil heard everything when you called. He already knew you weren't part of the plan. I asked him why he did it, and he said... She was quiet and started sobbing. He said I was a dead log, and that he wasn't going to turn down the chance to get a quality ass like Sandra. Oh, Dave, that's so hurtful, but I made him promise not to see Sandra again. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone in case you didn't believe me. Of course I believe you, Linda. Anyway, keep the tape, it might come in handy. I also went to see Sandra today. She was horrible, too, saying if I was a decent woman, I could keep my husband under control. That bitch was always picking on me. I asked her if she talked to you, and she said she would wait until you got over your temper tantrum and crawled home on your own. Dave, she's gonna bluff you. I'm so upset and embarrassed, I don't know what to do. Don't do anything, Linda. I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Maybe things will clear up after that. Well, I must say, the visit to the lawyer was not encouraging. Sandra's getting half of everything we have. The only value I got from him was at the very end. At first, I didn't understand what he was trying to say. He explained that the only time he had ever seen a guy in a better position than even a case like mine was when the husband made some racy videos to threaten his wife. He then asked, rather meaningfully, if Sandra's parents were alive and if she even went to church, while glancing at me with a hint of interest. What a great guy. On Wednesday, I snuck into my old house and installed cameras in the bedroom and living room. They transmitted the signal to a hard drive I had hidden in the basement. According to the guy at the store, I only needed to change the batteries and hard drive every 4 or 5 days, depending on the amount of use. That evening, Sandra finally deigned to send me a text asking when I would be home. I replied that I was out of town for a few weeks. Catching a mouse is much more likely if that mouse thinks the cat is gone. I was beginning to feel that Sandra didn't care about our marriage, and I realized I didn't want it anymore either. I kept in touch with Linda. Friday night, she called me and told me that Neil hadn't come home. I offered to pick her up and we went out to dinner. They say adversity craves community. We managed to distract each other and actually had a good time. On the way back, I told her about the cameras I had installed, but asked her to swear her to secrecy. I asked what she would do if she could prove that Neil was cheating on her. She replied that probably nothing. I figured that if I could rub Neil's infidelity in her face, she might harden up and consider divorce. It was the only way to get back at the bastard other than smashing his face in. So on the way back, I drove by my house and sure enough, I saw his car in the driveway. Linda cried all the way home and ran straight from the car into the house. I followed her and put her in bed and supported her until she stopped crying and fell asleep. I looked forward to Monday, which was the closest time I could safely get the videotape. Linda surprised me by calling Saturday night. She wanted to go out with me again to make Neil jealous. I had nothing to lose, so I agreed. After dinner, we went dancing and had a great time. I drove her home at 1:30 in the morning. Before we got there, Linda started to worry that Neil might have taken advantage of her absence to sneak back to Sandra's, but his car was at their house. At 9 o'clock Monday morning, I snuck into my old house and changed the hard drive and batteries. Still without a job, I was free all day to watch them. It was well past noon by now when I mustered up enough courage to watch. Up to this point, everything had been theoretical. Now, however, the proof was right in front of my nose. I caught myself closing my eyes as the screen showed footage of them entering the bedroom. I realized that I'd placed the camera a little poorly. It only caught their upper halves, but the sound was good. I opened my eyes again surprisingly soon after vaguely catching his moans as he climaxed. When I looked at the screen, they were lying next to each other and talking. I listened for a moment. Then excitedly, I called Linda and asked her to come to my motel. She arrived 20 minutes later. "Linda, you have to see this." Linda pulled a bottle of wine from the minibar and I turned on my laptop and started the replay. I started at the point where Sandra and Neil began their post-coital conversation. "When are you going to service my bimbo sister, Neil? It would be great if we could have a wedding in the spring. My attorney is going to file on Monday to have her served on Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't want to procrastinate too long. If she manages to get proof before then, I'll have failed my prenup. Don't you feel sorry for that naive bitch? No! I've stayed with the frigid bitch long enough. Do you know what it's like trying to stay aroused when the other person just lies there and stares like they hate every moment of it?" Sandra grinned oddly, but said nothing. "What about you, Sandy? Don't you feel anything for Dave? I wish you hadn't asked that. Yeah, I feel bad. He's been a wonderful husband and father, and he's great in bed, but it's time to change him. He's already unsuccessful, and you're successful, honey. To hell with him, to hell with both of them." Linda was desperate. I put my arm around her and stopped her from pouring a third glass of wine. She sobbed for a long time. I knew how she felt. I had felt the same way 10 days ago. Finally, she calmed down. "Linda, what kind of prenup was Neil talking about?" "Oh, Dad made us sign one before we got married." "What's in it, Linda?" "It's Dad's way of trying to protect my inheritance. If Neil cheats, I get everything. I think we have a copy at home." "Linda, do you realize what this means?" "What, Dave?" "It means that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, he's going to serve you for irreconcilable differences. He's going to take half your house, half your bank accounts, and half your company. How much money do you have in the bank?" "Last time I checked, almost $2 million. "Wow. Now how badly do you want to ruin his life, Linda?" "As much as I can, Dave. What do you suggest we do?" "Well, it seems to me that if you file a countersuit for adultery using my video as evidence, he'll walk away in his underwear and you'll be a very rich divorced woman with a huge bank account, a beautiful home, and a $12 million company. Would you want that, Linda?" Linda laughed, smiling wider than a used car salesman. "Wouldn't the Kennedys be afraid of a gun? Marry me, honey, marry me." Having known me for so long, she saw the joke in that and laughed again. We hugged one more time before the mood turned serious. Linda asked, "Are you sure the video is good enough? Have you watched it all?" After I admitted to closing my eyes during the rough episodes, Linda insisted we watch it together. She took my hand to help me through it. As for the scenes, it was a complete failure. The screen showed my darling wife and Neil stripping naked. Without any attempt at foreplay, Neil took her right in the missionary position. The quality was good enough to see her frowning in discomfort. I almost choked when after about a minute and a half she even looked at the clock behind his back. I paused the video. Linda, is it typical for Neil to act like that? Uh-huh. I can only assume you were a virgin when you got married. Am I right? Of course, Dave. At the risk of invading your privacy, I'm going to ask you this, though. Lynn, how long is Neil's, his equipment? About this long, she pointed, spreading her thumb and forefinger apart. No, I mean when it's working. That's when it's working. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, Lynn, I think I've solved another one of your problems. Without foreplay, with technique like his, and with such a small instrument, it's no wonder you don't enjoy sex. You see, Linda, I don't think you're frigid at all. That would be fantastic, Dave. Maybe I should go to the doctor and get some tests done. I stood up and gave her a hug, then exhaled into her ear. Let Dr. Dave see what he can find. Linda's moans started 30 seconds later while I was still kissing her neck. They didn't stop until 45 minutes later when the screaming began. As she sank into an exhausted but satisfied sleep, I slipped out of the house to bring us both lunch. When I returned, Linda was just getting out of the shower. She had a very nervous expression on her face. It soon disappeared as I kissed her deeply and for a very long time. This time I resisted her hands pulling on my head and made love to her as it should be. I don't claim to be a Casanova with a tremendous gift, but she didn't seem to have any complaints. We spent the rest of the afternoon and all evening kissing, caressing, and talking. The next day, Linda secured an emergency meeting with her attorney. Armed with my video and 2 statements, he began to draw up the paperwork. That afternoon and all evening, Linda and I played Scrabble. Honestly, guys, what did you think we were doing? Linda had the task of catching up. I've learned that there are some positions that just aren't for her. And in some of them, no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't drown out her screams, even with a pillow. Both of our phones rang frequently for the second night in a row, but we ignored them. Wednesday morning, Linda called Neil and said she would be home all day, and at 3:15 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw a young guy in a suit. Please come in. We've been expecting you. Linda's in the bathroom. Would you like some coffee? Slightly stunned, he machine agreed and walked in. Linda, I called out, the court messenger is here with your divorce papers. While waiting, we chatted for a while. He turned out to be quite a nice guy. His name was Phil. We were halfway through our coffee when Linda showed up. You know women? And in the bathroom, she came up to Phil. Yes, I'm Linda Winters. You have just what I need. After Phil did his official business, we chatted some more. Turns out it was a pretty shitty job, but it paid well. He declined a second cup and thanked us for such a unique experience. Unexpected, but enjoyable. Linda took one of his business cards. Suppressing the urge to laugh, we left the envelope on the table unopened, heading back to the motel again. That evening, I waited for Sandra when she returned from work. At the same time, I took the opportunity to change the hard drive and batteries. I stopped her pathetic apologies and immediately began showing her the edited highlights of her home video. She reacted with fury when I suggested that when she handed me the divorce papers, she better be damn generous to me or the video would become very public. She kicked me out. Her carefully thought-out plan went off the rails and collapsed with a resounding crash. The next day, Linda, me, and our new buddy Phil were waiting for Neil when he got home. Phil was enjoying it too. I stayed while Neil packed, always being between him and Linda. I couldn't wait for him to try something, and he understood that. 65 minutes later, he was gone, and another 35 minutes later, all the locks were changed. Bank and business accounts were frozen by then. Answering Sandra's call at 9 p.m., I was slightly embarrassed by her friendly tone. She said she just wanted to apologize in person for how horribly she had broken up our marriage, and could I please stop by her house to do so? For old time's sake, I headed home. No one answered my knock, and I tried the door. It was unlocked. I could hear Sandra's cries of passion echoing up the stairs. Playing along, I walked over and peeked into our bedroom. I realized with relief that I felt nothing but contempt for what I was seeing. Half a minute later, Sandra pretended she had just noticed me. You won't miss this, will you, Dave? Don't worry about me. Now I have a real man to satisfy me. Don't worry, dear. Thanks to that pencil tool, your sister is a much better person. Ignoring the profanity and hurled objects, I hurriedly retreated, wondering what it all meant. My first task at my new job the next day was to fire my predecessor. Starting with her money, the company was registered to Linda. Neil should have known his company had a strict moral code. But he did the damn thing anyway. Knowing absolutely nothing about production, I spent all morning talking to senior staff and appointing an interim manager. I had their full support. Like many men with small tool syndrome, Neil was not a pleasant character. I was just finishing up with the essentials when I was arrested. As it turned out, for assaulting Sandra Brown and Neil Winters. I couldn't help but admire this strategy that explained what had happened the previous evening. It was a little embarrassing to be looked at the police station as someone who beat his wife. I got out on bail that same day using almost all of the savings I had in my bank account. I was mildly surprised that Sandra hadn't cleaned it out yet. The next day I was served with a restraining order against approaching Sandra, Neil, and my old house. It was in effect for 6 months. While the lawyers went about their business, I moved in with Linda. The sex was mind-blowing. Linda was trying to make up for lost time. With my lips pressed tightly together, I accepted the shame of extramarital sex. We weren't interested in what our exes were up to, even though we'd heard they were no longer together. Sandra might have been willing to put up with his little boyfriend for a rich man, but not for a pauper. 3 months later, Linda's divorce was the first to surface. Neil didn't try to fight it, but he certainly fought the infidelity charge tooth and nail. He tried to argue that since the sex between him and Sandra was with Linda's full consent, it was not cheating. This was testified to by both Sandra and him. I, of course, testified in Linda's favor that we both asked them to stop when I found out about it, and Linda discovered that I was not a willing participant. I can't tell you how proud I was of Linda that day. She managed to tell the whole story about her alleged frigidity with her head held high, and later discovered it was all due to Neil's tiny equipment and his selfie technique. The press gallery, attracted as always by the sex scandal, reveled in it. Linda's recording of her begging Neil to end his affair upset the balance of power, and his petition was scrapped. With his integrity torn to shreds and his manhood shattered, Neil left town. After that, we didn't see Neil or Sandra for another 3 months. During the assault trial, Sandra smiled wickedly at me from the witness stand. She was very convincing, tearfully describing how I had caught her in bed with Neil. She said she realized what she had done was wrong, but she certainly didn't deserve to be beaten for it. The judge told me off when I applauded her performance at the end. Neil was a little less convincing, describing how he couldn't match my size and fury when I found him with my wife. This time I showed respect for the judge and didn't clap my hands. When my boyfriend offered the hidden camera footage from the living room as evidence, the prosecuting attorney tried to object, explaining that somehow that footage had not been turned over during the discovery process. My boyfriend apologized to the judge and explained that I couldn't get the hard drive until yesterday, because the restraining order was still in effect. In fact, Linda had removed it 2 days after my arrest, but my boyfriend didn't know that. I watched Sandra and Neil's faces as they watched the drama unfold on the screen. This time I had the camera set up correctly. The screen clearly showed them scheming at the kitchen table after I left. They were smart enough to take the camera off in the bedroom, but I don't know if they didn't think to look for another one or if they just didn't find one. After a lengthy discussion in front of a silent courtroom, Neil wrapped a towel around his arm and knocked Sandra to the floor. She, well done, just got up and prepared for round 2, where she brought the frying pan down on Neil with relish. "And you shouldn't have been first, Neil." The courtroom exploded. And so it was with great difficulty that I heard the case against me being dismissed and the judge yelling at the bailiff to arrest them. There are 2 crimes judges hate: contempt of court and perjury. Judges work hard to get where they are, and these criminals are framing the court and therefore holding themselves in contempt. Of course, I could have released the video earlier and charged them with conspiracy to pervert justice or perjury, but I didn't. Linda and I agreed that their mean and arrogant treatment of us deserved a stronger response. By the time I had cleared my name with the waiting reporters, the police chief wanted to talk to me. He apologized for my wrongful arrest. I immediately forgave him, and we chatted for a few minutes. And as soon as we were done, they let Sandra go. She headed toward Linda with obvious malice. I stepped between my former lover and my current lover. "Sandra, you wouldn't hit a pregnant woman, would you?" Sandra stopped like a dumbfounded person. Her face took on several shades of an extremely furious expression, and then she turned away before we could see her tears. 2 months later, I read in the paper that the happy couple received the minimum sentence for perjury, 12 months in jail. Okay, time to start the divorce and sell the house. I figured Sandra was right. Her date with Neil had awakened my competitive instinct. Except it wasn't the instinct to win back my date through sex, but a lower instinct, to kill and tear. 2 nights later, drenched in sweat, Linda and I continued our protracted argument. We continued our feverish bedroom sessions as Linda insisted that she had 15 years of missed pleasure and needed to make up for it. By my calculations, the debt owed to her was only 8 years. She insisted it was at least 12. As I lay there, stroking her bulging belly, we talked. Isn't that silly, honey? If they'd done the right thing, asked us for a divorce and then got back together, things would be very different today. I suppose we'd be devastated, but they'd be free and rich and have all the sex they could handle. Something tells me Neil is getting as much sex as he can. They say this dork can be very persistent. Now shut up and let's try to make up for 12 years. 8, you insatiable. And yesterday. What would you like to do for our 15th anniversary, Dave? Nothing, sweetheart, absolutely nothing. I am a state police captain investigating a mass shooting at a local nightclub. 12 people were killed and 20 more were injured. The shooter also died. The shooting took place at Club 81, a nightclub owned by a former professional football player who grew up in the area. The footballer, Mark Lavelle, and most of the victims were sitting at the same table. The only survivor was a young woman dressed as a prostitute. She was sitting across from me while the medics examined her. She was covered in blood and brain matter, but the medics concluded that it was not her blood, but most likely the blood of the footballer sitting next to her. I tried to ask her a few questions, but she was in a catatonic state and staring into space. The only time she reacted was when I asked her about the tattoo between her thumb and index finger. She showed me the tattoo, a black spade with the number 81 in white. Then she returned to her vacant stare, and the medics took her to the hospital. Initial witness statements, as usual, were contradictory. From CCTV footage, my team was able to establish that the shooter was dressed as a waiter, approached the table with a tray, and stood to the right of Lavelle. He dropped the tray, revealing guns in both hands. He fired the first shot with his left hand, point blank into Lavelle's face, which explains the presence of brain tissue and blood on the survivor sitting to Lavelle's left. Next was the woman sitting to Lavelle's right, whom the shooter shot with his right hand, point blank into the side of her head, almost completely destroying her face. After that, chaos ensued. Some of the men sitting at the table were armed and began to shoot back. One lucky shot hit the shooter in the chest, but he must have been wearing a bulletproof vest because he quickly got up and continued shooting, now using Lavaliere's body as a shield. The vest must have saved his life, but in movies, people get up and keep shooting only because it hurts like hell. I fell on my ass twice in similar circumstances. The shooter systematically worked his way around the table, shooting everyone who was sitting or shooting at him. There were 10 people sitting around the table, and he killed 9 of them, as well as some who were standing nearby. The survivor could be heard begging the shooter, "Kill me, Jim." The shooter replied, "Oh no, my dear wife, I want you to suffer for a long time, Besides, I only have one bullet left, and I need it to destroy the part of my heart that you didn't kill, and that way you'll be able to see my face in my coffin." The shooter tucked the gun under his vest, pulled the trigger, and blood spurted from under the vest. The next morning, I met with my team. The shooter was identified as Jim Silverman, who was married to the survivor, Linda Silverman. Initially, there were no signs that they were in conflict. She was a teacher at an elite private school. The shooter was a managing partner at a large international auditing firm. I wasn't sure what a managing partner did, but I was told he was probably richer than Lavelle. The two guns had been purchased 3 weeks earlier, and both had 19 rounds. The shooter had spent most of the last few weeks at the shooting range. What struck me most was that the shooter turned the gun on himself using the 38th bullet. In all the commotion and with multiple minor injuries, he was able to count how many bullets he had fired. During our meeting, the Silverman's house exploded and was completely destroyed, and the neighbors' houses were significantly damaged. Initially, it was concluded that it was a deliberate gas leak. I was lucky that no one from my team or any bystanders were injured, as my team members were on their way to the shooter's house. Neighbors said they had not seen the surviving woman and her children for 3 weeks, and had only seen the husband occasionally since then. He was usually very sociable, but had not spoken to anyone in the last 3 weeks. One of my team members opened the couple's Facebook page. There were photos of their wedding, parties, pregnancy, and 2 children who were probably now school-aged and looked just like my children. Finding their children became our top priority. When we arrived at the wife's parents' house, the door was open, but no one answered. My agents entered the house and found both parents dead in the living room with gunshot wounds to the face. We were able to access the surveillance camera. The recording shows Jim knocking on the door and breaking into the house, followed by the screams and cries of relatives. Jim pulls out guns and tells them, "Shut up. If you think Linda was so happy living in her fantasy, then I'm sure you'll let me live in mine." He then shot both of his in-laws in the face, first the husband and then the wife. We found the children in the shooter's parents' house. Both parents were in almost the same catatonic state as their daughter-in-law, and the nanny was taking care of the children. The parents understood from the news that their son was responsible for the mass murder, but they knew nothing else. Their son had shown up at their house unannounced 3 weeks earlier with 2 children and a bunch of their belongings. He told them he was divorcing his wife and needed his parents to take care of the children until things were sorted out. Since then, he had stopped by occasionally to check on the children, but never mentioned what had happened or what was going on. It took several days to identify the victims at the nightclub, as some had been disfigured. The woman sitting to the right of Lavelle was identified as Mary Allison, a friend of the survivor. We were able to find Mary and her husband's address and interviewed the husband, who was nearly drunk and smelled awful. He said he last saw his wife a month ago when she left for a bachelorette party. He didn't know where she had gone. He didn't notice she hadn't come home until the next morning. He checked his phone and found a message from Mary. "I'm sorry, I found someone else and I'm leaving you." Attached to the text was a photo of his white wife cheating on him. He said that was the last he heard from her, and she didn't respond to his text messages or phone calls except for another photo taken later that day. It showed a woman's hand with a tattoo between her thumb and index finger in the shape of a black spade and the white number 81. We managed to hack into Jim Silverman's cell phone. Over the past 3 weeks, he had received dozens of photos and videos showing his wife's infidelity. Over the past 3 weeks, Jim had texted and called Linda dozens of times, but except for the videos and photos, she never responded. On the 3rd day after the shooting, Jim's friend came to our office having barely slept. He said that 3 weeks ago, Jim, Linda, and 3 other couples, including himself, went to Club 81 to celebrate Jim's recent promotion. He wasn't sure who chose Club 81, but for some reason, he thought it was Linda. During dinner, Mary approached their table and started talking to Linda. He recognized Mary from the Silverman parties, but this time she was dressed like a prostitute. Every time she moved, her leather skirt shifted. He glanced at Jim, who looked like he was about to explode. By then, everyone had lost interest in their food, and was just watching Linda and Mary talking at the bar. They saw Lavelle approach Mary, kiss her passionately, and then leave with his entourage. Mary and Linda followed them to the exit. He sent his wife to find Linda, and she returned and said that the parking attendant had told her that Linda and Mary had left with Lavelle. Everyone at their table was in shock, talking and shouting at each other, and no one noticed Jim leave. That was the last time he saw them until he watched the evening news yesterday. Since that night, he learned that Lavelle had a reputation for leaving Club 81 with other men's wives, who were attracted by his reputation as a well-endowed and fantastic lover. Usually the wives returned to their husbands within a few days. Other wives who had been at his table claimed that husbands should forgive their unfaithful wives when they returned and allow them to enjoy their fantasy. He had recently filed for divorce, as had the other husbands at the table. The only one who had not filed for divorce was Jim, who had obviously found another solution. Some of my colleagues and I attended Lavelle's funeral 2 days later, or a week after the shooting. There was no viewing because no funeral home wanted to deal with the uproar caused by his reputation and the expected crowd. The coffin was closed because a 9mm bullet with a hollow point had destroyed most of his face, and it could not or would not be reconstructed. There were surprisingly few former football players at the funeral. However, more than 100 white women showed up, often with small children of clearly African descent or with large bellies. Some even came with their white husbands, so that some husbands forgave their wives for cheating and living in a fantasy world. While we were watching Lavelle's funeral, Linda Silverman left her hospital room. I'm not saying she ran away, because no criminal charges had been filed against her. She hadn't spoken since the shooting. Somehow Linda managed to leave the hospital and walk out onto the road in front of a city bus. She was killed instantly. A week later, I finally returned home to my wife. It was late and the kids were already in bed. My wife had been watching the news, looked at me and said, "I can see you've had a rough week. Sit down in the kitchen and I'll heat up your dinner." I sat down at the table, took my service pistol out of its shoulder holster, removed the magazine, and cleaned the chamber, as I had done 1,000 times before. I usually did this in the bedroom, but I could only climb the stairs once, so I put the gun and magazine on the kitchen table next to me. "I saw the news. Do you want to talk about it?" my wife asked. I rarely wanted to talk about the cases I was assigned to, and I hadn't talked about it at all since I started being sent on mass shootings. But this time I wanted to tell my wife about one case. "There's this former football player named Mark Lavelle. I'm sure you've seen his name in the news. He's known for being well-endowed and a fantastic lover. At a party celebrating the shooter's promotion, his wife decided to leave the bar with Lavelle. There are many more interesting details, but the most important thing is that the other wives at the table started arguing that the shooter should let his wife fulfill this fantasy and not let his male pride get in the way. Of course, the other husbands strongly disagreed with their wives, and now they are all going to court to get divorced. The wife's parents tried to convey the same idea to her husband. Before shooting people in a nightclub, he came to their house and said, and I quote, 'Please let me fulfill my fantasy,' and then shot them both in the face. Let's be clear, dear. There will never be any talk between us about fulfilling fantasies, about male egos getting in the way, and certainly not about second chances. Once is enough. Am I clear?" My wife's face turned several shades of gray as she emptied her glass of wine. She stood up to refill her glass. With her back to me, she said, "Honey, please put the gun away. I need to talk." When she turned back to me, I inserted the magazine and loaded the gun. I watched as my wife urinated in her pajamas, forming a large puddle of urine on the floor. I had my answer. I put the gun back in its holster, picked up the suitcase I had thrown in the hallway when I entered, and left the house for the last time.